Good afternoon. My name is Shubhendu. I come from Bangalore. I run a company called Afforestt, and we specialize in making urban forest. So the forest which we make are so small that even in a space as small as 1,000 square feet, we can make a forest of 300 trees. I started the company in 2011 in January, and it's been 7 years. We have made forests all over the world in 6 countries, at many difficult geographies, Rajasthan, Iran, in very arid places as well. So today I'm going to talk about how we make these forests and what are the areas where we can make many more of these and how these forests are going to improve the resilience in our urban setups. So can I get the presentation? Yeah? All right, okay. So this is my presentation. Well, most of the world we live in today was forest. Like many other speakers, I'm also using Sao Paulo as an example. But this was before we built up our cities on those forests and made them our habitats. But our habitats somehow stopped being our natural habitats. Most of the world we habitated long back was forest. Now we have removed these forests and made these homes where we are living, we are able to make a living, but we are not in sync with nature the way all the 8.4 million other species on the planet are. We are very much disconnected. So one of the experience which I had was to have a forest in the backyard of my own house. And this is the kind of view which I have from the window of my bedroom every day. One or the other bird, the birds keep changing, they start nesting with season, different types of birds come and start living. And what I found was that somewhere this disconnect which we have with nature has to be recreated. And not far away, we shouldn't be going far away from a city to experience such an experience, but it should have been done right there where we live. So we started making these forests. This is a photo from a resort in Hyderabad. And we found that it creates a kind of experience which is much better than any other urban setting one can imagine themselves to be in. If I say click, will you change? Okay. All right, so one of the things which these forests have is that they are so dense that you can't even walk into it. And a forest like this is just a 4 meters wide strip of forest, and it can shield you from noise, from pollution, from all the SPM. It can create that kind of forest experience which you would have otherwise found in a natural forest, but right there in the middle of your city. So we specialize in creating such forests in many different places, and this is one of the examples in apartment building. We have this high rise of around 27 floors, and there is a tiny forest just next to it. My story is I studied industrial engineering in college. I happened to work for Toyota, specialized in making cars, so I was working for Toyota, and that's where I met this scientist. His name is Dr. Akira Miyawaki, who came to our factory to make a forest in it so that we can have our factory carbon neutral. And we made this, next please. I saw his work in one such presentation when he presented his previous projects. And it kind of fascinated me in a way. I looked at it as an engineer, and I understood that in a very small period of time, you can create a product, a forest, which will only become better with time. Otherwise, we were making cars, and if you leave a car for 10 years, it will deteriorate in quality. However, forest, as a product itself, it keeps becoming better and better, and that fascinated me a lot. In just 2 to 3 years, these forests become self-sustaining. So this was the first forest we made with Dr. Miyawaki in the factory where I was working. And this is just 1,000 square feet of area. It has 330 trees in it of 42 different species. The width is just 4 meters. And within 2 years, it is a self-sustaining natural forest. You don't even have to water it. So I learned the methodology from Miyawaki in this particular project. And then I made a forest in my own house in its backyard. It's just 70 square meters. And this is how it looks now after 3 years. So within these 3 years, you can see the house is still there behind the forest, but it's totally shielded. So we have a highway next to the house, and all the dust pollution which was coming in the house, that has stopped. Our windows now open into this forest, and whole day we keep seeing some squirrels, birds in the forest. So I keep talking about these forests, but the way we define a forest is, or the way Dr. Miyawaki defined a forest, is a place so dense with trees that you can't even walk into it, irrespective of whether it is spread over acres and acres of area, or it is in somebody's backyard. So I made a forest in my backyard, then I made a forest in somebody else's backyard. This is in Dotsworth Enclave in Bangalore. Slowly we started getting more work. I started a company. We started making forests for factories. Bangalore Airport, we made this forest recently. So factories, airport, Chennai Metro, schools, colleges, public parks, even a zoo. This is a resort. Many different places, wherever, like anywhere and everywhere, we have tried making these forests and made these forests. A lot of this particular project is in Hyderabad. The land was totally barren. It had only one species of tree, which was an invasive species, Juliflora. I don't know if you know. It's a thorny tree, and it is so invasive it doesn't allow anything else to grow. We had to eradicate all of it. And we planted a forest of around 48 species, which were native to that particular belt of Telangana. And now it's a lush green forest. When we walk into this forest, we see peacocks, we see small foxes. It's in, the total property is 38 acres, and this is 20 acres of that property is a forest now. Also, yeah. Okay. Okay, so this will receive the signal now. Okay, so this is a corporate premises in Chennai where we made this forest. Geographically also they are very much spread over many difficult areas as well. So we have made some forest in Iran, in Rajasthan, we made a forest. And you can see the land next to it is still as barren as it was, like typical deserted barren land. Not even grass can grow on this land. It is so barren. Rainwater doesn't seep in because of its the soil particle being so small. It doesn't allow anything to go in. Whenever rainwater falls on it, it just evaporates back into the atmosphere. So groundwater also was not available. So for this particular project, first we dug up a big lake. We collected all the rainwater because we couldn't use the groundwater because of its saline nature. And using that water, we created this strip of forest. It's 5 meters wide, and the total property is around 200 acres. So this strip of forest surrounds the periphery of the property. It's just 1 year old, the picture which you see. We started with small saplings, and now they have grown and become a dense natural forest. So even in places as arid and deserted as Rajasthan, it's very much possible. To make a forest, we start with soil. We identify the properties which soil lacks. For that, we may have to touch, feel, even taste it at times. Primarily, 3 properties we identify in a soil. Its water retention capacity, its perforation capacity so that roots can penetrate easily into it, and the nutrition content in the soil. The fourth thing which we have to identify, which is linked with nutrition, is how much alive the soil is. So nutrition cannot be replaced by chemical fertilizers in this method. So we use the cow dung manure or any other animal manure. We use for nutrition, we use paddy husk or any other husk for perforation capacity, different types of peats for water retention capacity. And so that we can have a continuous supply of nutrition, we artificially introduce microorganisms to the soil, which can produce the nutrition then and there in the soil. Parallelly, we have to identify the native tree species of that particular geography wherever we are working. So we go to a natural forest or the last remains of a natural forest, which has been untouched, which is not a plantation. Many a times one may confuse a plantation with a forest because that's the way we define, or that's the way the ministry defines a forest. This is a forest. But any teak plantation which forest department has planted cannot qualify as a forest. We have to go to those untouched areas which have evolved naturally over thousands of years. Now, in a natural succession, first the grasses grow, then shrubs, then small trees, then big trees, and eventually the forest reaches a stage that the same species keep on regenerating themselves on that particular geography. We call this forest as Climax Forest. So we go to a natural forest and identify these Climax Forest species. Usually they are slow-growing hardwood trees, which would make a dense forest which doesn't even allow the sunlight to reach the ground. We identify these trees. Out of all the species we would have identified, we segregate the Climax Forest species and make a forest of these Climax Forest species. We divide them in 4 different layers: shrub layer, subtree layer, tree layer, and canopy layer. And by doing this, we can make a forest without wasting any vertical space. So if you compare it to a conventional landscape, you will see that there is no ground cover. We have to continuously maintain all these trees. We have to artificially provide them nutrition, manure to just keep them alive. However, in a dense natural forest like this, the trees would grow 10 times faster because of all the work we have done in soil and the density at which we have planted. If you go to a natural forest, you will see every square meter has around 900 seeds. And out of these 900 seeds, 3 to 5 will get a chance to grow into a big tree. What we do is, on day 1 itself, we plant these 3 to 5 saplings per square meter. And because of such a good density and because of all the nutrition availability in soil, every plant grows very fast. In order to achieve more and more sunlight, they tend to grow tall. So you achieve a growth rate which is 10 times faster than the conventional growth rate of landscape trees. The green surface area in a forest like this is 30 times more because we aren't wasting any vertical space. Every cubic inch of the vertical space is filled up with greenery. The flora itself is around 30, 40, 50 times more biodiverse. So if in conventional style of landscaping we plant only 1 tree or 2 different tree species, here we have 30 different tree species, even in a place like Rajasthan. The picture which you saw had 32 tree species native to Rajasthan. And the process is 100% organic. We do not use any industrially made material, even if it is organic. So we try to procure local, and it helps us minimize the cost of forest making as well. So by doing all this, by using the local materials, high density, you can make a forest of around 300 trees in parking spaces of 6 cars. Around 90 square meters, you can make a forest of 300 trees. With time, the forest keeps growing and reaches a stage where the sunlight stops reaching the ground. This usually happens in 2 to 3 years. And at this stage, all the leaves which fall, they get decayed quickly. They convert into humus. This humus becomes food for the forest. So the forest keeps growing, means with age, when it is 4 years old, more number of leaves would be falling, means more food is produced, so it can grow still more. So with age, with time, it keeps growing exponentially. In first year, if it would have grown just 20 centimeters, in second year, it would be 60 to 70 centimeters. And eventually, with time, in just 2 to 3 years, it reaches a stage where we can declare it as a self-sustaining natural forest. It doesn't need any watering, it doesn't need any manure from outside. It is a cluster of more than 30, 40 different tree species. This picture is from Faridabad, near Delhi. And in 10 years, within 10 years, this entire patch of forest will reach a stage when it will start to look like a 100-year-old equivalent forest. At this stage, the trees would have grown tall, the slow-growing trees would have grown tall and developed a canopy, totally shielding the upper layer of the forest. All the shade-loving trees would be flourishing under the shade of these tall trees. When we start with whatever number of trees we would start with. Eventually, we will end up with 70% of the initial mix. But at this stage, a lot of trees would have already fallen their seeds, and those seedlings would be waiting for a vacant space and canopy to open up when a tree dies its natural death, and they would grow and cover up that space in the canopy. So these forests keep on regenerating themselves again and again. So until there is a big climate change like the next ice age, they will keep on regenerating themselves. And at this stage, they attract a lot of biodiversity. They attract a lot of fauna. They can even attract clouds if they are large enough. But of course, they reduce urban heat island effect in a massive way. And one of the biggest achievement of such tiny forests in cities is that you get the small biodiversity, the tiny biodiversity which is most fragile, right there in middle of the cities. All these pictures are from our forest inside the cities. Now these small animals, bees or frogs, they're shy and they can't survive in open environments. So even if you have acres and acres of landscape, it's very difficult to identify this kind of biodiversity there, because for bees to make a beehive, they need absolute seclusion, which is created in dense natural forests like this, where humans can't even walk. Small birds would nest inside these forests in the three-dimensional space. They will find some small area and they will start nesting there. The moist forest floor, which eventually we achieve in 2 to 3 years, becomes a habitat for frogs and snails. How these forests can help make cities more resilient. So my guru, Dr. Akira Miyawaki, comes from Japan, which has been hit by most of the earthquakes, tsunamis, all the environmental disasters. This was 1990 Kobe earthquake, when even the roads collapsed. After the earthquake followed a fire, and almost the entire city was burnt in this fire, barring one place. Now this one place was a shrine, a Shinto shrine, which had something in Kannada we call Devar Kadu, in Kerala we call Kav, in Japanese they call it Shinjino Mori, forest of the shrine. So just like many other cultures of the world, including India, they had a concept of shrine, forest of the shrine. Out of few thousands of these before World War, eventually now only few hundreds are remaining. One such Shinto shrine was there inside in the middle of Kobe city, which was unaffected. So Dr. Miyawaki went to this particular shrine, identified the tree species existed there, collected the seeds from there, and used this forest, the Shinjino Mori, as benchmark for creating more of such forest inside the city. What happened was that because of the deep roots of these trees, this picture is from one of our Miyawaki forests, which is just 1 year old. Because of the roots of these trees, the earthquake won't affect much. The soil will still stay intact. And because the trees above the ground are evergreen, they stopped fire from spreading into the shrine. So year after year, the resilience of such buildings is only going to increase with time. Second example, this was very recent, 2011, the Pacific coast of Japan was hit by tsunami. And again, another shrine which was just next to the sea in Iwanuma prefecture, survived as if nothing has happened. Otherwise, everything around the shrine was totally gone. In fact, the houses, the cars, all the infrastructure, when the tsunami went back, it took it it went back with the tsunami. So at last, the only structure and the patch of greenery which was remaining, even the palm trees which were planted as a tide embankment forest were gone because they were non-native. Their roots were shallow, they were not that deep. So everything was gone, even just this part was remaining, and they did the same thing. They identified the tree species growing in this particular shrine, and now in Iwanuma prefecture, they are making a forest along the Pacific coast of tsunami. Now this forest is going to be 300 kilometers long. 2 years back, we also got a chance to work on this particular project. It's called Mourinho Project, and the word Mourinho comes from Mori, and the Shinji no Mori, they took Mourinho from there, and Mourinho is the mascot of this project. So you can see the forest is in shape of a mound. It is around 8 meters tall, and the trees are eventually going to add another 20 meters to this particular forest wall. It's also called the Great Forest Wall Project. And the idea is that whenever a tsunami hits the Pacific coast or any other embankment, the property doesn't go back into the ocean, and also it reduces the impact of tsunami. So out of these practices, Dr. Miyawaki has identified 4 different areas where they have declared them disaster prevention forests. These areas are for flatlands. These forests can be used for evacuation. If there is a fire accident in the city, people can come and be in this evergreen forest, which is a little higher than the normal ground level of the city. Private woods for each building, where forest strip, maybe a 3 to 4 meters wide strip of forest, can shield a building, provide privacy, reduce noise, dust in regular days, and at the time of disaster, it can prevent fire and earthquakes and whatnot. Also, the embankments are next to the water bodies. So if they flood, usually whenever there is a small flood in water bodies, whatever soil is around it, it simply gets eroded. However, if you have a natural forest like this, deep-rooted trees, they hold the soil very strongly, and this erosion can be stopped altogether. And of course, the tide embankment forest, just like they have along the Pacific coast to prevent the areas from tsunami. And how do we, so the way we are trying to achieve this is by providing a service called forestscaping, which is an alternate to conventional landscaping. Also, this is one of the way we want to integrate art and forest together. So what we identified was that usually human intervention in a forest is always considered negative. If we have human footprint in a forest, usually we find it in form of trash or the trees which we would have cut. But if you go a little back in time, maybe just 500 years, or even now in tribal areas, you will see totem poles, you will see artworks, you will see a lot of positive human intervention, which is usually ignored by we, the urban dwellers. So one of the ideas was to how we can have a positive human intervention in the forest, and how we can make them more interactive, how we can create forests which are designed in a way that we can go in and experience them. Because so far our forests had been so dense that you can't even walk into them. So once the forests were grown, humans were actually elbowed out of these forests. They would come only on the day of plantation, and after that, slowly as the forest grows, you can't even access it. So we started experimenting with such an integration of art and forest in US, in Minnesota. We did this project in a sculpture park, where we made this forest with a Chinese artist. She made moving sculptures which would grow with the forest. So this is when it was 5 months old. And this project kind of opened up some windows for us, where we started thinking in how artists and forest makers can work together and create something beautiful. All of that was experimented in this pilot project. it was a residential complex with more than 500 houses. They had a park, and the owner of that, the builder, wanted to have a forest in that particular park. He wanted to give half of the park for that, so we somehow persuaded him to get us the full park. And we created this design called Forest of Well-being. Now the idea here is that in the big circle which you can see, the outer periphery of the leaf, would be a running track, so people can just get into the forest if they want to jog and run. And the inner arteries are so that people can have a slow walk. And we have created the differentiation with the type of materials which we have used to create the floor, to create the hardscape. All the red color marks are benches. So when you sit on a bench like this, behind you have a forest, in front of you have a forest, and because none of them are complete straight lines, wherever you look, if you look around, you will be totally surrounded by the forest. The theme of this particular project was Shirin Yoku, which is Japanese term for forest bathing. The idea is that once you are in the forest, you should be able to forget everything that you are in a residential complex, and you totally submerge yourself in a forest. When you breathe the aerosols coming out of the trees. A lot of medicinal trees are also there in the forest. So a natural healing happens, and anyways you will become calmer and happy just by being in this forest. Purposely, we didn't design a central space in a park like this. We wanted the person to be independent. The idea was the theme or the way designer wrote about in the brief of this project is the people will lose themselves to find themselves. So we kept the pathways very narrow that not even two people can walk together hand in hand. You have to go in a forest like this totally independently as an individual. On the two nodes in this design, we asked a sculptor to make two sculptures based on the history of the site. So long back it was a mango orchard, then it became a farm, then it became a mill, and then it became a residential complex. So based on the history of site, he is creating two sculptures. This is how it looked in AutoCAD. This is how it looked after we finished the plantation. The reason why that property developer was ready to give us this entire project instead of having a park was this. Compared to a conventional landscape, initially making a forest may be a little more expensive. However, this forest doesn't need any maintenance after 2 years. So if you if you consider in the inflation of maintenance cost, over a period of 10 years, the maintenance cost is anyways going to increase. And eventually it reaches a level where compared to making a forest, landscaping will cost you 4 times more than the cost of having a forest. But you will be losing on all the advantages which a forest has, 30 times more greenery and so much biodiversity, on all the good things which a forest brings in. And so this was, for him, the money was deciding factor. However, now he has quite fallen in love with the whole idea of having a forest in residential complex. This is another project. This is for Hero Motors in Halol, Gujarat. They have their principles: integrity, humility, teamwork, speed, and respect. We took these principles and created a design around it. There are circles where we have these pathways, and in the center, the white color center dot which you see, they are going to place a motorcycle. So this becomes a forest exhibit for their product as well. This is right there in their factory, which is yet to be inaugurated. All the hardscape, so in such projects, the hardscape cannot differ from the nature of a forest, which is that everything in a forest, whatever produce, whether it is wood or it's any produce, when it falls back onto the soil, it becomes one. So considering that, we used only local materials, the rock which was available at the site, the soil was used to create such infrastructure as well. So we used rammed earth and created the benches. And we didn't have to buy anything from outside. We just have to go there with our tools. but every material we used in making of this hardscape for this project was available in that 200-acre campus of Hero Motors itself. So with this idea, I believe we can eventually reach a stage which was kind of this, long back, when forest or the greenery was so dense that everywhere you see, this is a painting from a museum in Rajasthan. It's a miniature painting. And the people you see in these paintings are not tribals. They're kings. You have Tansen, you have Akbar, and you have a saint, Swami Haridas. They were so much in sync with nature that though they were kings and could have been always living in palaces, but they always had this connect with the environment around them. And also the detailing which we saw was that there is enough of fauna everywhere. Every single bird sitting on these trees is different. And you see all those 4 different layers which we try to sell as a service: shrub layer, subtree layer, tree layer, and canopy layer. And it was so natural to the painter itself that he identified and put it in the painting. Also, you can see the diversity of the trees. And our larger goal is to bring back such a time, such an experience. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. Thank you. Thanks.